Welcome. May these times we live in find you well. And now, for your consideration, a mysterious tale of what I believe to have been a truly supernatural encounter. A true story, one that happened to a schoolboy who I knew very well, because that schoolboy was me. I used to walk home from school in those days for my dinner. 12 noon I'd dash home, and then back to classes again for 1 o'clock. There were no 4x4s, no cars waiting in a line to pick the kids up, not back in 1972. Mothers were at home housekeeping, and fathers worked. All the other parents, like my own, had just one car. The mothers would walk the younger children to and from school. But I had been walking the 3/4 of a mile by myself since the age of 6, as had most of my classmates. And I was now 10, and in another year I would be leaving junior school for high school and beyond. Now, my route to school would take me down my street and down through another housing estate. On the way, I would see and join other children, all heading to the same destination. Many of these I knew from my neighborhood, and some of them would also become lifelong friends. There was also a shortcut, a dirt path that went up behind the houses on the other side of my street. It was on the edge of a large, uneven field, roughly overgrown with wild flowers, brambles and clumps of thick grasses. It also had a single dotted line of old trees that followed the rough path for perhaps 50 yards, before the path then emerged onto the main road of my street. The field was one of those priceless parts of a halcyon childhood, and kids from miles around would play there, explore the dips and the mounds and climb the trees. I had been back and forth to school down this shortcut hundreds of times, and on this particular day was on my way back home, hungry for my dinner. As usual, my mind was mulling over the lessons of that morning and the banter and the gossip of my friends. As I made my way up the path, I noticed I was alone. This was unusual at this time of day. 9 times out of 10 there would be some of the children either ahead or behind me. The other strange thing I noticed was that, despite the fact it was midday and not too overcast with clouds, there was a ground mist, slowly swirling maybe 6 inches to a foot deep on the main field beyond the trees. I paused and looked at this mist. I had never seen a ground mist on this field before, ever. Something, somehow, then drew my gaze to focus on an area of this mist. This was some 6 to 10 yards diagonally ahead and to my left, beyond a gap in the trees. I instinctively knew something was going to happen, and at that exact moment, I noticed something very dark and round, just poking above the mist. To my astonishment, I saw this round, dark thing slowly, smoothly rise straight up out of the mist, out of the very ground. Like an ICBM leaving a silo in slow motion, it kept rising, until before me was something that looked like a tall figure completely draped in a very dark cloth. I could see no face, no eyes, no arms, just a vague outline of head and shoulders, and then it was almost a perfect cone of draped black cloth. If it had feet, I couldn't see any, because the black cloth draped fully to the ground, disappearing under the swirling mist. To this day, I couldn't say it was a human shape underneath. It seemed more strange somehow. Like a head and shoulders possibly, but then just a smooth cone of cloth down, giving no indication of arms nor legs. It made no sound, and had taken perhaps a good 30 seconds to reach its full height, which I'd estimate to be between 5'7" and 6 foot. I was frozen to the spot, not out of fear, somewhat surprisingly, but out of sheer amazement. Thoughts raced through my head. Is someone playing a joke, a prank on me? No, this was too real, far beyond the capability of the bigger, older lads who often bullied us when we played on the field. Also, I just somehow instinctively knew it was real, and that was a shock. It was then my mind also realized the absurdity of it all. This was midday in June, and just 2 yards to my right were the back gardens of houses at the edge of the field. I quickly took my eye off the thing to look around and see if anyone else was in their garden or looking out of a window. I looked behind me and back down the path for any other kids going home. But I was alone. I looked back at it, and as if waiting for me to do so, it began to move. Transfixed, my eyes wide as saucers, what it did next dispelled beyond any lingering doubt that I was in an encounter with something supernatural. It didn't walk, it glided. It glided over the ground, mist parting around it like the wake of water around the bow of a boat, smoothly, slowly, but steadily, directly toward me. Despite the fact it appeared to have no face or eyes, it was clearly aware of me and approached closer. Again, the whole situation seemed absurd. I could not believe what I was actually seeing. Is it a ghost? I asked myself. It certainly didn't seem to be what I considered at that age classic ghosts to look like, i.e., transparent, yet noticeably human. What is it? What could it be? I thought to myself. As it got to within 20 feet of me, my bravery was beginning to waver. What would it do? What could it do? Would it speak? It had made no sound whatsoever so far. A part of me wanted to stand my ground, to call its bluff. After all, I was 10 and on the cusp of adolescence. I wasn't a frightened little boy. Surely it couldn't do me any harm, or drag me under the ground from where it came. However, it had now arrived at the nearest tree, some 12 feet away, and it was solid, tall as a man, in the blackest black cloth I have ever seen. It had not hesitated in its approach for one moment, and my bravery now dissolved like sugar in hot coffee. I spurred it past it in a 10-yard dash up the path. I stopped and quickly turned around to see how far it would follow me up the path. But I couldn't see it behind me, or beside the tree where it had been. I looked beyond the trees to see if it returned to the field, but I instinctively knew it had vanished. I then noticed the ground mist was also gone. At that moment, I was slightly regretting my running away, which seemed to have banished the strange entity from our world. Or perhaps its time in our dimension was limited. And speaking of time, this encounter was no brief glimpse of a few seconds, incidentally. From it rising out of the ground to it reaching the tree must have been 2-3 minutes, if not more. Despite some slight regret at my cowardice, my overwhelming memory was of the moment it reached the tree beside me. I had felt the cold chill of mortal danger for the first time in the entire encounter, and a strong primal instinct warning me to get away. To this very day, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had not run. A part of me is still curious.